Section 1. The World Beneath the Surface. Settle in. Get comfortable. Pull the blanket a little closer. Tonight, we are going somewhere cold, somewhere ancient, somewhere that has been holding its secrets for over 1,000 years, tucked inside crumbling stone walls and buried beneath mountains of ice and snow. We are going to Skyrim, and we are not going there to fight. We are going there to listen, to wonder, to sit with questions that have no clean answers, and let them carry you somewhere slow and still. There is a particular feeling that comes over you when you enter a Dwemer ruin for the first time. Not just the first time in a new playthrough, the very first time, when you do not yet know what the Dwemer were, when the machinery is still alien and surprising, when the steam that hisses from pipes in the walls is genuinely unexpected. That feeling is not quite wonder, and not quite dread, and not quite sadness. It is something in the space between those things. The feeling of being somewhere that was built by people who are entirely gone, and built so well that everything still works, and the absence of the builders is somehow louder than the machinery they left running. That feeling, that specific, quiet, slightly mournful feeling, is what this night is built around. We are not going to race through dungeons. We are not going to optimize builds or discuss combat mechanics. We are going to sit with the places and people and questions in Skyrim that resist easy understanding, and we are going to give them the slow attention they deserve. Here is what you need to understand about Skyrim before we go any further. When Bethesda built this world back in 2011, they did not just build a map with dungeons and dragons and a main quest. They built something closer to an archaeological site. Layer upon layer of history, of culture, of mystery, stacked on top of each other like geological strata in a cliff face. The ancient Nordic ruins that line every mountain pass did not just appear there for the sake of having dungeons to explore. They mean something. The books scattered across tavern shelves and college dormitories were not placed there as decoration. They tell real stories, and those stories connect to each other in ways that only become visible when you read all of them and lay them side by side. The world of Skyrim contains 337 readable books, with a combined total of around 316,000 words. That is more words than the entire first book of the Lord of the Rings trilogy. Bethesda hired actual writers to create this library of fictional texts, treating world building with the seriousness of actual literature. And these are not just flavor text, they are testimony. They are evidence. They are accounts of things that happened in this world, some of them written by people who were present, some of them written by scholars, reconstructing events from fragments, some of them written by people who had reasons to obscure the truth. The gap between what the books say and what actually happened is itself a kind of mystery. And then there are the questions the world quietly poses, with no books attached to them at all. Questions without quest markers, without journal entries, without any NPC who will give you the answer if you ask the right way. These are perhaps the most interesting things in the whole game. A village with inexplicably fertile soil and soul gems on every shelf. A letter arriving regularly from someone who knows exactly where you have been and exactly where you should go next, signed only by a friend. A warrior in black armor who appears only at the pinnacle of your journey, carrying a past so enormous that no record of it exists anywhere in the world. Bones too large to belong to any creature you have ever seen embedded in the walls of a Dwemer ruin, visible only for a few seconds as you fall through a trapdoor in the dark. These are the kinds of things we are going to sit with tonight, quietly, unhurriedly. Not every mystery has a solution, and that is genuinely all right. Sometimes the open question is the thing worth savoring. Sometimes the silence at the end of a long thread of evidence is more interesting than any answer could be. Sometimes the best thing a mystery can do is stay a mystery and let you live in the space it creates. The Elder Scrolls universe is unusual among video game settings in its willingness to commit to genuine ambiguity. Most games, when they create a puzzle, intend for it to be solved. Most mystery narratives are designed with an answer waiting at the end of the thread. But the people who built Skyrim and the wider Elder Scrolls canon across Morrowind and Oblivion and the games that came before seem to have understood that the most compelling thing you can do with a question is leave it open, in a way that is specifically shaped that gives you just enough to feel the outline of an answer without ever letting you hold the answer itself. The shape of the Dwemer's disappearance is more haunting than any explanation would be. The shape of Rorikstead's secret is more unsettling than a full reveal would make it. The shape of the Ebony Warrior's identity is more interesting than a name and a biography. The world of Skyrim is a world designed to reward obsession. The more you look, the more you find. The more you find, the more you realize how much more there is. Players have been playing this game for over a decade, and new discoveries are still being made. New connections, new interpretations, new ways of reading the same dialogue, or the same placement of items, in a room that open up a layer of meaning that was invisible before. Tonight, we are going to follow 12 of those threads. Some of them will come close to resolution. Most of them will not. And in the comfortable dark, with nothing pressing that needs your attention and nowhere you need to be, that incompleteness is going to feel exactly right. So, take a slow breath. Let your shoulders drop. The fire is warm. The storm outside the window is far away. The questions are old and patient and perfectly capable of waiting for you to settle before they begin. We are starting at the beginning with the strangest disappearance in the history of Tamriel. Before we continue, drop a comment and tell me where you are watching from tonight and what time it is there. There is something meaningful about knowing people all across the world are settling in at the same moment, following the same quiet thread of mystery through the dark. And if this kind of unhurried, deep exploration of Skyrim's lore is something that helps you rest, subscribing means you will always find the next one waiting. Number. Section 2. The Vanishing of the Dwemer. There is a question that sits at the heart of the Elder Scrolls universe, and it has never been answered. Not in Skyrim, not in Morrowind, where the Dwemer ruins are even more abundant, even more haunting, even more saturated with the presence of an absence. Not in the lore books that fill the shelves of every College of Winterhold student who has ever tried to piece the story together in the quiet of a dormitory, with a candle burning low and the Arctic wind pressing against the stone outside. The question is simple and enormous. Where did an entire civilization go? Not a civilization that collapsed slowly over generations, not one that fell to disease or famine or military defeat over decades. The Dwemer, the Deep Elves, the so-called dwarves, who were neither particularly small nor particularly interested in the title, disappeared in a single instant. One moment they were everywhere across Tamriel, in the mines beneath Markarth, in the great underground network of Blackreach, that impossible cavern city beneath Skyrim's northern mountains, in the corridors of Mazolft and Alftand and Nuchuan-Zel and dozens of other ruins scattered across the continent. The next moment, they were simply gone. Every single one of them, across all of Tamriel, simultaneously, in what every account of the event describes as a single, catastrophic, instantaneous moment. Their fires burned on, their machinery kept running, their traps stayed armed, their books remained open on their desks, and their food, in some documented cases, was still warm on the table. Think about what that means for a moment. If every person in an entire civilization disappeared right now, exactly right now, while going about the business of their day, while cooking and reading and working and sleeping, the residue of their existence would persist in exactly this way. Warm food, open books, machines mid-cycle, the machinery of daily life continuing without the people who set it in motion. The Dwemer ruins of Skyrim are not ruins in the traditional sense. They are not places that crumbled and fell and were reclaimed by nature. They are places that were simply abandoned, instantly and completely, without any of the normal processes that produce abandonment. No gradual withdrawal, no removal of valuables, no sign of preparation for departure. They were there, and then they were not, and everything they owned is still exactly where they left it. The year was the 700th year of the First Era, and the place was the slopes of Red Mountain in what is now Morrowind. A battle was being fought there, the Battle of Red Mountain, between the Dwemer and the Chimer, a group of elves who would eventually become the dark-skinned Dunmer we meet in Skyrim's Grey Quarter. The conflict had deep roots in politics and philosophy and old grudges between elven cultures, but at its center, on the Dwemer side, was something that had nothing to do with politics at all. It was an engineering project of breathtaking ambition. Their greatest architect and engineer, a figure named Kagranak, had made a discovery that changed everything about the Dwemer's understanding of what was possible. Buried deep beneath Red Mountain was the heart of Lorkhan. This requires a moment of explanation, because the Heart of Lorkhan is not simply a powerful magical artifact, though it is certainly that. In the mythology of the Elder Scrolls universe, Lorkhan, called Shor by the Nords, called by many names, by many cultures, was one of the original divine beings who created the world of Mundus, the mortal plane. The creation of Mundus came at a terrible cost. It drained the divine power of the gods who participated in it, and many of those gods resented Lorkhan for engineering this outcome. As punishment, Lorkhan was killed, his heart torn from his body and flung across the world. Where the heart landed in Morrowind, it sank into the earth and remained there for ages. A physical piece of a dead god. A reservoir of power so vast and so fundamental that even millennia after Lorkhan's death, the heart was still radiating force sufficient to reshape reality in its immediate vicinity. Kagrenak found the heart and began working with it. He fashioned 3 specific tools: a gauntlet called Wraithguard, a hammer called Sunder, and a blade called Keening, each one designed to interact with the heart in particular ways. With Sunder, you could strike the heart and draw its power. With Keening, you could focus and channel that power. With Wraithguard, you could protect yourself from the energies involved. And over years of experimentation and theoretical work, Kagrenak developed his grand ambition. He wrote about it in a text called Divine Metaphysics, which can actually be found and read in Skyrim, sitting on a library shelf like any other book, extraordinary and frightening in the calmness of its language. In Divine Metaphysics, Kagrenak describes the process of creating gods through rational engineering. He treats divinity not as a sacred and ineffable condition, but as a technical problem that can be solved with sufficient precision, sufficient tools, and sufficient understanding of the underlying mechanics. He wanted to connect the Dwemer race to the power of the Heart of Lorkhan and elevate them beyond mortality entirely. His instrument for this elevation was Numidium, a colossal mechanical construct, a brass titan of impossible size, powered by the heart itself. If Numidium could be successfully built and activated with the heart as its power source, Kagrenak believed the Dwemer could transcend the limitations of mortal existence. Whether this meant true immortality, divine status, or something else entirely, even Kagrenak's most detailed writings do not entirely specify. The goal was transformation. The goal was becoming something other than what they were. At the Battle of Red Mountain, whether in a moment of desperation as the military situation deteriorated or in a calculated execution of his plan, Kagrenak used his tools on the heart, and then every Dwemer in the world was gone. What actually happened is where the mystery begins to fracture into multiple directions simultaneously, each direction compelling, none of them definitively eliminatable. In the ruins of a Dwemer settlement called Bamzamshend in Mournhold, a place that was sealed and undisturbed for centuries before being rediscovered, investigators found piles of ash. Not scattered ash, not the ash of a fire ash arranged in the shapes of bodies. People who were sitting in chairs and lying in beds and standing at workbenches at the moment the disappearance occurred, and whose physical forms became ash instantaneously, while leaving the impression of their former presence behind. Their clothes and armor remained, their possessions remained, their ash remained in human shapes. Whatever happened to the Dwemer at the moment of their disappearance was not a relocation or an escape. Something catastrophic happened to their physical bodies, even as the circumstances of their physical surroundings continued unchanged. In Skyrim's College of Winterhold, a researcher named Arniel Gain devotes considerable effort to solving this mystery. He obtains Keening, one of Kagrenak's 3 original tools, and attempts to recreate the circumstances of the disappearance in miniature using a soul gem as a substitute for the Heart of Lorkhan. He performs what he describes as a reconstruction of Kagrenak's original action. The result is identical to the original event. Arniel Gain vanishes instantaneously, without ash, without remains, without explanation. The soul gem does not explode. There is no flash of light. He is simply there, and then he is not. His shade, a fragmented, partial version of his consciousness, sometimes appears afterward near the college, communicating in broken and incomplete ways, suggesting that he exists in some intermediate state between conventional life and conventional death. This corroborates the idea that the Dwemer were not destroyed in any final sense, but displaced into some condition or location that is adjacent to ordinary existence without being part of it. The first major theory about what happened is that Kagrenac succeeded in the most literal interpretation of his goal, and that the Dwemer were elevated to a form of existence that is, by definition, incompatible with mortal reality. They became something that cannot coexist with the physical world, and so the physical world simply no longer contains them. They are not in Aetherius, the divine realm, because that realm has its own rules about what belongs there. They are not in Oblivion, the dimension of the Daedric princes, because that too has structure and rules. They are in something else, a state that Kagrenac may have theorized about in his more speculative writings, but could not have described in any verifiable detail, because no mortal had ever been there before. Yagrum Bogarn, the last known living Dwemer found in Morrowind, in a condition of extreme physical deterioration, confined to a modified Dwemer mechanical spider that serves as a kind of life support, contracting a disease called corporus that bloats and twists the body, but provides a terrible immortality, poses this theory himself, haltingly, when questioned by the Nerevarine in the events of Morrowind. He was in an outer realm when the disappearance occurred, one of the many dimensional spaces that exist alongside normal reality, and returned to find his people gone. His working theory, developed over centuries of solitary contemplation, is that Kagrenac succeeded in granting the Dwemer something like eternal life, but that the form of that life required a complete departure from the mortal plane. He does not know where they went. He is not entirely sure they know where they went. He is the only survivor of a civilization of millions, and the isolation of that position is present in every word he says. The second major theory is stranger, and draws on the concept of the zero sum, an idea from the deeper metaphysical layers of Elder Scrolls lore, in which the nature of reality, as the Elder Scrolls universe understands, it is somewhat different from how mortals normally conceive of it. Under this theory, when Kagrenac struck the heart at the Battle of Red Mountain, the effect was not a transfer of power or an elevation to a new state. It was an insight, a complete and total revelation of the actual nature of existence. The Dwemer, in that instant, understood with perfect clarity something about reality that no mortal mind is built to survive understanding. And in the wake of that understanding, they could no longer maintain the cognitive framework that keeps a mortal being attached to the mortal plane. They did not go anywhere. They simply stopped being part of the consensus that makes the world the world. Whether this constitutes death, liberation, or something with no moral valence at all is a question the theory leaves as open as every other question surrounding the Dwemer. A third theory is darker, in a more ordinary way. It suggests that Kagrenac's error was one of direction, that the tools were designed to draw power from the heart and channel it into the Dwemer, but that something in the execution was reversed, that the Dwemer were pulled into the heart rather than elevated by it, that they became fuel rather than recipients. That inside Numidium, inside the great brass god that was eventually completed and used by later rulers for their own purposes, is the compressed and trapped essence of every Dwemer who ever lived. This would explain why the Numidium, when it was used, left destruction on a scale disproportionate even to its physical size. It would explain the low, suffering quality that some scholars attribute to its operation. Something enormous and wrong is powering it, something that should not be there. The Dwemer ghosts that haunt some of their ruins are evidence of something. They are aggressive and hostile, in a way that suggests not simple animalistic territory defense, but something more specific, something more like anguish. These are not passive echoes. They react. They pursue. They feel, in their ghost forms, like they are still here and desperately do not want to be. What that implies about the nature of what happened to them in the moment of the disappearance is left to the imagination of whoever encounters them in the dark of the ruins. And the ruins themselves go on. Across all of Skyrim, across all of Tamriel, the machinery of the Dwemer continues to operate, thousands of years without maintenance, without fuel in any conventional sense, without anyone to repair the components that should have worn out centuries ago. The Centurions pace their programmed routes. The steam pipes maintain their pressure. The automated defenses respond to unauthorized entry, exactly as they were designed to. This is what the Dwemer built when they understood reality as a series of sonic relationships rather than physical mechanisms. They built systems that are self-sustaining because they operate on frequencies rather than fuel, on resonance rather than maintenance. They built for a future they fully intended to inhabit and then vanished before they could inhabit it. The ruins are their monument and their riddle. You can walk through them for hours and come away knowing less than you expected and wondering more than you planned to. That is the correct response to the Dwemer. That is what they left behind for anyone who came after them. Questions and machinery that keeps asking them. Number Section 3. Rorikstead, the village that makes deals. There is a small farming village in the plains of Whiterun Hold, sitting along the western road. It is called Rorikstead, and everything about it looks ordinary. Low stone buildings against a flat horizon. Some crop fields that look a bit greener than the surrounding tundra might suggest they should be. A few farmers who will talk to you about weather and grain prices with the comfortable vagueness of people who do not expect their conversations to be memorable. There is no quest that begins in Rorikstead, no dragon attacks, no dramatic discovery. On the surface, it is exactly what it appears to be, a quiet place where simple people live simple lives. But the longer you look at Rorikstead, the stranger it becomes. Start with the soil. Rorikstead sits in a part of Skyrim that is not particularly hospitable to agriculture. The tundra of Whiterun Hold is dry and cold, and the growing season is short. Most farms in the hold struggle. Most of the food that sustains Whiterun comes from a difficult and constant fight against the land. Rorikstead, by contrast, has fields that are notably healthy. The crops are full and green in a way that seems at odds with the environment they are growing in. If you bring this up with the village's residents, if you ask them, in that conversational way, you can ask NPCs almost anything in Skyrim about the secret of their productive land, you get answers that are not quite answers. A man named Juan Manet says something careful about hard work and good soil and changes the subject. A woman named Reldith gives nearly the same response. Both of them get slightly defensive. Both of them close the conversation with a firmness that is out of proportion to what ought to be an innocuous question. In a village where everyone presumably knows everything about everyone, the question of why the crops grow so well is treated like something that should not be asked. This would be unremarkable if it were the only strange thing. It is not. Walk through the houses of Rorikstead with attention to what is on the shelves. In a village of farmers, you will find soul gems. Not one or two left over from some past traveler's visit, a notable number of them, distributed across multiple households, sitting there among the vegetables and the cooking pots, like ordinary household items. Soul gems are not farming tools. They are not ordinary household necessities in any culture in Tamriel. Their function is specific. They trap the souls of living beings. They are used in enchanting, yes, but they are also essential components of certain kinds of ritual magic, certain kinds of dark bargaining with forces that exist outside the ordinary framework of human commerce and exchange. Farmers in the plains of Whiterun Hold have no secular reason to own soul gems, and yet there they are, neatly placed as if they belong. In Juan Manet's house, you will find a book called Spirit of the Daedra. This is not a book about farming. It is not a book about healing, which is Juan's supposed profession. It is a philosophical and theological examination of the Daedric princes, the great and terrible powers who inhabit oblivion, who deal with mortals in complex and often catastrophic ways, and who are generally regarded by ordinary Skyrim citizens with a mixture of religious awe and very practical fear. Spirit of the Daedra discusses specifically the ways in which Daedric princes interact with mortal souls and how bargains between mortals and Daedric entities are structured. It is a manual for a very specific kind of interaction. It is not casual reading material, and it is sitting in the house of the village healer. The village healer who has been in Rorikstead since its founding. This matters, and here is why. 2 men in Rorikstead are raising children alone. Eric's father, a man named Mralki, who runs the local inn, mentions that Eric's mother died when Eric was born. A farmer named Lemkill is raising twin daughters named Sissel and Britta, and he mentions bitterly and somewhat repeatedly that their mother died as well, in childbirth. 2 mothers, 2 births, 2 deaths. In a small village, with a healer Juan present during both events, by his own timeline of residence in Rorikstead, and Juan, for all his described skill as a healer, was unable to save either woman. There is an additional strangeness in Juan's relationship with Sissel, one of Lemkil's daughters. He has been secretly teaching her magic. Not healing magic, not restoration, which would be the obvious subject for a healer to pass on. He is teaching her water breathing, the ability to breathe underwater, and a spell to extinguish candles. Both of these are illusion or alteration spells of no particular practical value in the daily life of a farming village girl. Water breathing might have one obvious use: being in water for extended periods, being in water for purposes that have nothing to do with swimming or swimming pools, extended submersion for ritual purposes. Candle extinguishing might suggest precision of magical control at a very small scale, the kind of precision you would want in a magical framework where control and timing matter enormously. The theory that has emerged and solidified over years of community investigation is this: the deal that Rorikstead made whatever bargain turned their infertile soil productive requires ongoing payment. The currency is the souls of fertile women at the moment of childbirth. The new soul that enters the world at the birth of a child creates a particular kind of spiritual moment, a threshold between existence and non-existence. And in that moment, another soul can be taken through a corresponding threshold. The mothers of Rorikstead are not dying in childbirth. They are being sacrificed at childbirth, their souls captured in soul gems, offered to whatever Daedric prince accepted Rorikstead's original bargain. The only adult woman currently in Rorikstead is elderly. She cannot bear children. The village's two other female residents are Sissel and Brite, who are children not yet old enough to be targets, but being prepared. Juan is teaching Sissel magic because Sissel will eventually be old enough to be used in the ritual, and she needs to understand enough about magic to participate willingly or to be unable to resist competently. The Daedric prince, most theorized as the dealmaker, is Clavicus Vile, whose entire sphere of influence is organized around bargains, around the exchange of one thing for another, around deals that seem generous in their terms and are always more expensive than anticipated. Fertile land in exchange for fertile souls at fertile moments. It is precisely the kind of exchange that Clavicus Vile would design and enjoy. The soul gems make sense in this context. The book about Daedric interaction makes sense in this context. The deaths make sense in this context. Even the defensiveness about the soil makes sense. These people know what they have agreed to, or at least know that the village's prosperity comes at a cost they do not discuss with outsiders. There is one more detail that locks this theory into something more than speculation. Lokir, the man who dies trying to run from the execution block at Helgen in the game's opening scene, the one who Ralof calls a horse thief, the one who barely has time to register his surprise before the arrow hits him, is from Rorikstead. He says so himself, in the moments before the execution. And the manner of his death, the desperation of his attempt to run, the specific character of his willingness to try for an escape that anyone watching could see, was essentially hopeless. This is the behavior of a person who is more afraid of something behind him than of what is in front of him. He did not want to go back to Rorikstead. He wanted to be somewhere, anywhere, that was not Rorikstead. The community consensus is that Rorikstead is unfinished, that there was originally planned to be a quest that would have explored and resolved this thread, and that it was cut before the game was completed. The breadcrumbs of that cut quest remain in the village, in the defensive dialogue, and the misplaced books and the soul gems on the shelves, creating the texture of something deeply wrong without the resolution of what that wrongness is, which leaves Rorikstead sitting there on the western plains, its fields improbably green, its farmers improbably tight-lipped, and its history of dead mothers unexplained, with nothing but the shape of a secret to hold on to. Number. Section 4. Sadia. And Kematu. A truth with no ending. There is a quest in Skyrim that begins when two Redguard warriors are turned away from Whiterun's gates, and it presents you with one of the game's most genuinely unresolvable moral situations. The quest is called In My Time of Need. On the surface, it is a simple bounty situation someone is wanted, people have come to collect, and the Dragonborn can choose sides. Underneath the surface, it is something else. A story where both accounts of what happened are internally coherent, Both storytellers have plausible motives to lie, and the truth may be genuinely inaccessible to any outside investigator, including the player. The elite warriors, elite Redguard soldiers, members of a fighting tradition that is one of the most respected in all of Tamriel, are looking for a Redguard woman. Their leader, a man named Kimatu, will eventually explain what they want and why, if you find him in the bandit cave called Swindler's Den, west of Whiterun. His account is direct and specific. The woman they are looking for is a noblewoman named Iman, operating under the false name Sadia. She was a member of a wealthy Hammerfell family. During the war between Hammerfell and the Aldmeri Dominion, a brutal, prolonged conflict that Hammerfell eventually fought to a negotiated standstill after the Empire abandoned them, Iman sold information to the Dominion. The information she provided, Kimatu says, contributed to the fall of the city of Taneth. People died as a result. She is wanted in Hammerfell to face justice for treason, and the Alakar are there to bring her home. The woman herself, working in the Bannered Mare Inn as a server, quiet and apparently unremarkable, tells a very different story when you confront her with the knowledge that the Alakar are looking for her. She says she is a noblewoman who fled Hammerfell after speaking out against the Aldmeri Dominion. The Dominion placed a bounty on her head for her outspokenness. The Alakar warriors, she says, are not loyal Redguard soldiers serving Hammerfell's justice. They are mercenaries, hired by the Thalmor agents of the Dominion, pursuing her because she was a political inconvenience who escaped. Both stories are possible. That is the fundamental problem. Consider what we know about Redguard culture from the game's wider lore. The Redguards of Hammerfell are perhaps the most aggressively anti-Thalmor people in all of Tamriel. When the Empire signed the White Gold Concordat with the Aldmeri Dominion, a humiliating peace treaty that conceded significant territory and banned worship of the god Talos Hammerfell, refused to accept the terms. They fought on, alone, for years, until they negotiated their own separate peace. The idea that a group of elite Alakar warriors would accept payment from the Thalmor to pursue a target is not just unlikely. Given this cultural context, it is nearly inconceivable. The Thalmor are the enemy. They have always been the enemy. An Alakar mercenary working for the Thalmor is roughly equivalent to a medieval crusader working as an assassin for the Saracens. This makes Sadia's story seem much less credible when examined against what the game tells you about the world. And yet, Kimatu's account has problems of its own. The timeline of the Hammerfell War does not line up cleanly with the story he tells. The fall of Taneth, if it occurred during the main conflict, would have been approximately 20 to 25 years before the events of Skyrim. The treatment of this betrayal as a current and pressing matter of justice, the deployment of an expensive team of skilled warriors across an entire continent to pursue someone over an event that requires a degree of institutional continuity and priority that strains credulity for its own reasons. Hammerfell has been fighting a war. Its institutions and priorities have been reorganized around that fight. The pursuit of a single traitor from 2 decades ago, across borders and into a foreign country, speaks to either an unusual degree of commitment to historical justice or a more immediate motivation that Kimatu is not disclosing. There is also the fact that Kimatu's team is hiding, not operating openly, not presenting themselves to the Jarl of Whiterun with credentials and a formal extradition request, but hiding in a bandit cave and paying the bandits for the privilege. This is not how legitimate law enforcement operates, even in Skyrim's relatively informal political landscape. If Kimatu were a properly credentialed agent of the Hammerfell government pursuing a documented traitor, he would have diplomatic options. The fact that he is skulking in the wilderness suggests either that he lacks those credentials or that he has reasons not to operate openly, that he is not sharing. And then there is the moment when Kimatu actually captures Sadia if you choose to bring her to him. He uses a paralysis spell to incapacitate her. Not a killing blow, not a quick execution of a target. He treats her as someone who needs to be transported and delivered, not eliminated. This is consistent with his account of wanting to bring her to justice, but it is also consistent with wanting to deliver her alive to a buyer. The difference between a lawful arrest and a kidnapping for sale is sometimes just the question of who is paying. Players have examined every possible angle of this quest for years. They have looked at the architecture of the dialogue, at the specific claims each party makes that can be independently verified against the game's wider lore, at behavioral details and how each character carries themselves under questioning. The conclusions are genuinely split. Some people conclude that Kamatu is telling the truth, and Sadia is a traitor trying to escape justice. Some people conclude that Sadia is telling the truth, and Kamatu is either a liar or a man who has been misled about the nature of his mission. Some people conclude that both parties are telling partial truths, and the full story involves dimensions that neither is disclosing. What is most interesting about this quest, sitting with it in the dark, is that the game makes both outcomes feel wrong. If you side with Kamatu and deliver Sadia to him, the quiet dignity with which she walks to her fate is haunting regardless of what she did. If you side with Sadia and help her drive off the Alikur, the specific competence and professional code of Kamatu's warriors makes you wonder what you have done. The quest is designed to make you feel the weight of a decision made with insufficient information. It is designed to reproduce, in the context of a fantasy role-playing game, the specific moral discomfort of having to act without the ability to know the truth. Skyrim will not tell you which of them was right. It closes the quest and moves on, and the truth of what happened in Hammerfell during the war, and what Sadia did or did not do, and what Kamatu was or was not serving that truth, belongs to a history the game does not have room to contain in full. Number Section 5. The letter from a friend. Who is watching you? At some point after slaying your first dragon and establishing yourself as the Dragonborn, a courier will find you. Couriers in Skyrim have a remarkable talent for this. They appear in the middle of wilderness, in the depths of dungeons, in the outer courtyard of a vampire lord's castle, always confident, always with something addressed specifically to you. They are one of those details that players learn to treat as a game mechanic and stop thinking about as a narrative strangeness. But this particular courier's letter is worth thinking about as a narrative strangeness. It is addressed to you. It references, with specific accuracy, a place you recently visited and a shout you used there. It expresses knowledge of your nature as the Dragonborn knowledge that was not widely disseminated at the time the letter was presumably written and sent. And it directs you toward a word wall, a carved stone monument hidden somewhere in Skyrim's ruins, where a new word of power waits. The letter is signed at the bottom with 2 words, a friend. Not a name, not an organization, a friend. This will happen again, many times. Every time you use a shout in a named location, a city, a village, a ruin, a cave, with a designation on your map, another letter will eventually arrive, always in the same format, always referencing where you were and what you did, always directing you somewhere new, always signed the same way. Over the course of a full playthrough, you might receive 20 or more of these letters. They constitute an ongoing, anonymous correspondence from someone who knows where you are at all times, knows what you are doing with your abilities, and has a specific agenda regarding your development as a Dragonborn. Someone who wants you to find the word walls. Someone who wants your Thuum to grow. The most immediately obvious candidate is Delphine, the blade hiding in Riverwood who becomes one of your primary allies in the main quest. She knows who you are. She figured it out before most NPCs even believe you exist. She has been researching the return of the dragons for years and tracking any sign of a new Dragonborn. She signed a previous note to you simply as a friend, specifically the note that was left at the Sleeping Giant Inn to arrange the meeting that kicks off a crucial section of the main quest. And she is clever and resourceful enough to set up a courier system. But Delphine cannot be the friend, or at least cannot be the only explanation, because the letters continue arriving regardless of what happens to Delphine. If the player kills her, which is possible, the letters keep coming. If the player has never met her when the first letter arrives, also possible the letter still comes. The timing and content of the letters are governed by game mechanics that operate completely independently of Delphine's existence or status. Whatever is sending these letters is not Delphine, or is not only Delphine, or Delphine is serving as a conduit for something that would continue without her. The Greybeards, the ancient masters of the Thuum who live at High Hrothgar, are an obvious next candidate. They have spent centuries studying the voice in all its aspects. They know where every word wall in Skyrim is. They have dedicated their lives to understanding the language of dragons and the monuments that encode it. They explicitly want the Dragonborn to develop their Thuum, and they have the knowledge to direct someone towards specific word walls. But their philosophy is centered on silence. Jürgen Windcaller's way of the voice is built on the understanding that casual use of the voice, even in speech, carries consequences, and the Greybeards have extended this principle to a near-complete vow of silence. They communicate through gesture and, in extreme circumstances, through restrained written notes. The idea of them maintaining a prolific letter-writing campaign through the provincial courier service sits very awkwardly against their established character. And then there is the theory that has attracted serious attention from the part of the Skyrim community that focuses on lore: Hermaeus Mora, the Daedric Prince of Knowledge, Fate, and the Unknown. The prince whose realm of Apocrypha is an infinite library containing every text ever written, and many that have not been written yet, is a being whose defining characteristic is the accumulation of information about all things that are, were, or will be. He knows where every word wall in Skyrim is, because he knows everything. He has a specific and documented interest in the Dragonborn. By the time you encounter him properly in the Dragonborn DLC, it is clear that he has been watching you for the entirety of your adventure, that you represent something of interest and potential to him. Sending anonymous letters to develop a useful asset is exactly the kind of patient, indirect, information brokering behavior that Mora would find natural. He does not appear in a form that writes letters he manifests as a seething mass of eyes and tentacles, but his intelligence and influence operate through mortal intermediaries all the time. A carefully managed courier system, sustained by the Prince of Knowledge, who literally knows everything, is well within his established capabilities. The theory that Talos himself is the anonymous friend carries a particular emotional resonance. Talos, the mortal hero who became a god, whose worship has been criminalized by the Thalmor, who exists in the complicated space between history and divinity, would have urgent and deep reasons to want the Dragonborn to grow stronger. The Dragonborn's destiny is directly tied to the preservation of the world from Alduin's consumption, and Talos, as a divine being, with an investment in the mortal world's continuation, would be highly motivated to shepherd that destiny forward. But he cannot sign his name. His name is banned. His identity as a god is disputed. A letter from Talos would be evidence of the very thing that the White Gold Concordat declares does not exist. So he writes a friend instead, and lets the absence of his name carry the weight of the political situation he is caught in. The courier, when asked, cannot tell you who hired him. He was paid and given an address. He has another delivery waiting. He is gone before the question is fully formed. And the letter in your hand references where you were and what you did with such specific accuracy that the only comfortable interpretation is that someone was there with you or can see across distances that should be impossible, or both. The answer to who is sending these letters is not available in the game. It may not have been decided by the people who wrote the game. It is the kind of narrative detail that functions perfectly as a mystery, and would function much less perfectly as an answer. Knowing who the friend is would close a loop that works better open. The sense of being watched by something that is not hostile but is attentive, that is guiding you without revealing itself, is one of the more effective atmospheric achievements of Skyrim's storytelling. The letters create a presence. The unsigned name maintains a quality of mystery. And you keep finding the word walls, and the Thuum keeps growing, and somewhere in the world someone who calls themselves your friend knows exactly where you will go next. Number, Section 6. Kagranzel and the Bones in the Dark. The Dwemer ruin of Kagranzel is not famous. It is not the kind of place that appears on any recommended exploration list. It sits in the Velothi Mountains east of Riften, half buried in snow, accessible only by climbing a steep and poorly marked path up into the rocks above a frozen lake. The elevation makes the air thin and the light strange. Most players find it by accident, following a path they thought would lead somewhere else, drawn by the dim glow of the ruin's entrance cutting through the snowstorm. Inside, you find a room. Just one room, unexpectedly small for a Dwemer installation, unexpectedly sparse. 3 tall stone pillars stand in a rough triangle around a central plinth. On the plinth, an orb of warm-colored light pulses gently, breathing, as if something inside it is alive. The floor around the plinth is littered with items, weapons, potions, scattered armor, left by travelers who came before you and did not walk out. 2 such travelers are still here, their bodies lying where they fell, undisturbed in the cold air. The moment you touch the orb, the floor opens. A trapdoor, triggered by your contact with the light, drops you into a shaft, cut deep into the mountain's interior. And the fall is long enough to have time to look around, long enough to notice, on either side of the shaft's stone walls, something embedded in the rock that should not be there. Bones, ribs, the partial skeleton of something immense, embedded in the mountain's own body, partially revealed and partially still buried in the stone. They are curved and pale and enormous. The comparison to a mammoth becomes unavoidable, and then immediately inadequate. A mammoth rib reaches perhaps to the height of a grown person's shoulder. These ribs reach vastly beyond that. The creature that left these bones behind was not merely large. It was large in a category that the creatures of contemporary Skyrim do not inhabit. Dragons are large. These bones are larger. You hit the water below the shaft, and the ruin continues around you. Falmer-infested caverns, flooded passages, the sounds of automatons, somewhere in the dark. The bones are above you, in the shaft you fell through. You cannot go back to examine them slowly. You will find them represented on the local map, these enormous ribs outlined faintly in the cave architecture. But you will never be able to stand next to them and measure them, or touch them, or determine with any certainty what left them there. The name of the ruin is the first clue. Kagranzel translates to Music City in Dwemeris, the language of the Dwemer. This is not a casual naming choice. The Dwemer did not name their installations whimsically. The names encoded function, purpose, the specific identity of a place within the larger framework of Dwemer civilization. A place called Music City was a place where music, or more precisely, where tonal architecture was the central activity, where the study and application of sound as a structural and magical force was what the site was built to do. The Dwemer's tonal architecture theory is worth explaining fully because it is one of the most remarkable things about their civilization. They believed, and their works demonstrate, that this belief was operationally correct, not merely theoretical, that reality is fundamentally sonic in nature. That existence itself is composed of vibrations and resonances, of waves moving through matter and space at frequencies that the ordinary senses cannot detect, but that can be identified and manipulated by sufficiently advanced instruments. Their machinery does not run on fuel in any conventional sense. It runs on resonance. The centurions and spheres are not mechanical in the way a clock or a steam engine is mechanical. They are devices that have been tuned to specific frequencies that the world maintains around them, and they draw on those frequencies continuously, which is why they still function after thousands of years, with no maintenance and no fuel source. They are not consuming energy. They are participating in energy that was already present. Given this framework, a Dwemer installation called Music City would have been a research station focused on discovering, studying, and manipulating sonic phenomena of unusual character. And the bones in the walls of the shaft below that installation suggest that the Dwemer found, at some point, a creature of extraordinary sonic capability, something that produced sounds or experienced the world through sounds in ways that were directly relevant to the Dwemer's theoretical and practical interests. The unofficial lore of the Elder Scrolls universe, drawn in part from the speculative writings of Michael Kirkbride, describes creatures called snow whales. They are enormous beings who lived at the extreme elevations of Skyrim's highest peaks, in the thin, cold air above the permanent snowline, and who sang in ways that were directly magical, not metaphorically. Their vocalization was a form of tonal manipulation. Their songs could carry physical force. The joy snow that one piece of this lore describes them spreading as they sang was not metaphorical. It was a real meteorological phenomenon generated by the physical properties of their vocalizations. These were creatures whose biology included what the Dwemer would have recognized as an innate tonal architecture capability. Creatures who could do naturally what the Dwemer spent generations learning to do through instrumentation and engineering. The implications of this, for a Dwemer research station on a mountain famous for its sonic properties, are significant. The Dwemer were not sentimental about other species. The history of their treatment of the Falmer, the snow elves, who sought refuge with them and were enslaved, blinded, and systematically degraded over generations, makes that entirely clear. If they found a creature that could naturally manipulate reality through sound, they would study it. They would attempt to replicate the biological mechanisms responsible for the capability. They would, if the creature proved more useful, confined than free, confine it. The bones in the walls of Cagrenzel's shaft are consistent with a creature that was brought to the site, studied, and eventually died there. Its remains eventually absorbed into the mountain's geology as centuries passed. The low, occasional trembling that the game includes as an atmospheric detail for Cagrenzel's lower cavern, a sound and vibration that has no geological explanation, that seems to come from nowhere, that Falmer and automaton alike do not react to, because it is simply part of the background reality of the place, may be resonance, may be the echo of experiments conducted there long ago, still ringing in the stone. The principle of tonal architecture suggests that frequencies impressed on matter do not simply stop when their source does. They persist. They attenuate slowly, over very long times. Whatever Music City was doing in the mountain above this cavern, the mountain is still doing it, quietly, at frequencies just below the threshold of ordinary perception. Number. Section 7. The Abandoned Shack and Astrid's Lie. At some point in Skyrim, if you have killed an abusive orphanage headmistress at the behest of a grieving child, you will wake up in a place you do not recognize. You will not remember falling asleep there. You will simply open your eyes to cold air and dim light in an abandoned building in the marshes north of Morthal, and a woman will be watching you from a high shelf with the patient composure of someone who has all the time in the world and knows it. Her name is Astrid. She leads the Dark Brotherhood's sanctuary in Skyrim. She is intelligent and controlled and professionally frightening, and she is about to present you with a riddle that the game does not solve. 3 people are tied to chairs in the room with you. They are hooded, unable to see. One is a mercenary named Fultheim, the Fearless, a man with a history of violence whose instinct, even hooded and tied, is to stay composed and assess his situation. One is a woman named Alea Quintus, who mentions her 6 children with the specific urgency of someone whose family is the clearest and most immediate reason she needs to survive this. One is a Khajiit named Vasha, whose elaborately unconcerned effect in the face of captivity suggests he has been in worse situations and regards this one as manageable. Astrid explains the situation with the clean efficiency of someone who has done this before. "You killed Grelod the Kind," she says. That kill belonged to the Night Mother. The Dark Brotherhood operates under a theological framework in which the Night Mother, their immortal, mummified matriarch, who mediates between the Brotherhood and the void entity Sithis, receives contracts through a ritual called the Black Sacrament, and those contracts belong to the Brotherhood. When Aventus Aretino performed the sacrament to request Grelod's death, the Night Mother received the contract. You completed it without being sent. You stole a kill that belonged to them, and the Brotherhood wants payment. Payment takes the form of 1 kill, here, now, in this room. One of the 3 captives, Astrid says, has a contract on their head. Identify the right target and complete the contract, and your debt is settled. She will not tell you which one. She will let you speak to all 3, let you try to assess them, let you make your choice. And when you make your choice and kill someone, she will accept the result, call the debt settled, and give you the key to the shack. She never confirms whether you chose correctly. She never even clearly implies it. You killed someone, and she accepted it, and you go free. For years, the dominant reading of this scene was that Astrid was lying, that she invented the premise of a contract to test whether you would kill on command, which is what the Brotherhood actually needs to know about a prospective recruit. Under this reading, none of the 3 captives had a contract on them. The whole exercise was theater, and the correct answer to the riddle was that there was no correct answer. Kill anyone or kill no one. The test is about the killing, not the target. But the more careful reading, the one that emerges when you examine the Dark Brotherhood's theological framework, rather than just the surface narrative of the scene, points to something considerably stranger. And it points to a reading in which Astrid is telling the exact truth, from a certain angle, while everything about how she frames it is designed to make that truth invisible. Think about the Night Mother's claim. The Night Mother received a contract for the death of Grelod the Kind. That contract was completed. Grelod is dead. but it was completed by an unauthorized party, by someone who acted on the Night Mother's behalf without being sanctioned by the Night Mother to do so. In the Brotherhood's religious framework, this creates an imbalance. The Night Mother is owed something. The specific theology of the Brotherhood holds that completing a Night Mother contract without authorization creates a claim the unauthorized killer owes the Night Mother a life. The debt is in kind. A life was taken that belonged to the Night Mother. A life is now owed to the Night Mother. The person who owes this life is the Dragonborn. Under this reading, the contract Astrid is referring to is a contract on you. You are the one who has a contract on your head. And Astrid, who knows this, is offering you a deal. Complete a different kill, here, now, and she will intercede with the Night Mother's claim on your behalf. She will accept a lesser life as settlement for the larger debt. It is extortion dressed as a test, dressed as an initiation ritual, and Astrid's genius is that the framing one of the three captives has a contract is technically true, while simultaneously pointing you in exactly the wrong direction. Whether any of the three captives actually has any other kind of contract on them is a separate question that the game leaves genuinely open. Fulltime, the mercenary, likely has enemies who might pay to see him dead. Vasha, the Khajiit's studied composure about being tied up by assassins, suggests a familiarity with the underworld that might generate contracts. Alea Quintus, with 6 children, is the least obvious target, but has her own unknown history. None of them can be definitively ruled in or out as having sacrament contracts. The information is simply unavailable. What is available when you stand in that cold room with the 3 hooded strangers and the woman on the shelf watching you is the feeling of making a choice that you do not have enough information to make correctly. The weight of that feeling is the point. The Brotherhood's initiation is not designed to give you the right answer. It is designed to put you in a situation where there is no right answer available and measure what you do in that situation. The test is not, can you identify the contract target? The test is, what do you do when you cannot identify the contract target? And whatever you do, Astrid accepts it, because she already knew, from the beginning, that the target was you. Number, Section 8, the Ebony Warrior, a god in armor. When you reach level 80 in Skyrim, when you have absorbed enough dragon souls and mastered enough skills to reach a level that most casual players never approach, a figure will approach you. He will walk up to you in whatever city or settlement you are visiting, unhurried and direct. He will be tall. He will wear ebony armor so complete and so black that the light of the room seems to fall into it rather than bounce from it. And he will address you as if he has been looking for you specifically, because you are the only person in Skyrim he would bother to address at all. He says he has completed everything. He lists, with quiet specificity, the things he has done. He has visited every corner of Tamriel. He has mastered combat in all its forms. He has acquired wealth and reputation and skill beyond the reach of any ordinary mortal. He has faced every kind of challenge that the world contains and emerged from each one without finding in the victory the thing he was looking for. He is, by his own account, simply finished with mortal life, not tired of it in the way of someone who is depressed or despairing, finished with it in the way of someone who has completed a course of study and is ready to move on to whatever comes after. He is asking you, the Dragonborn, to fight him at a desolate location in the Velothi Mountains called the Last Vigil, to be the instrument of his death. The fight that follows, if you go to the Last Vigil and engage him, is one of the most demanding in the game outside of modded content. He uses shouts, including unrelenting force, the same shout you have been collecting and developing throughout the entire game. He uses restoration magic to heal himself mid-battle. He carries an ebony sword with a life-absorbing enchantment and an ebony bow that paralyzes on hit. His armor rating is exceptional. He is a fully optimized combatant who has spent a very long time becoming exactly as capable as he says he is. When he falls, there is no speech, no final revelation. He simply dies. The armor settles onto the snow. Beneath it is a Redguard man, indeterminate in age, carrying nothing that identifies him. No journal, no name, no note explaining who he was, or where he came from, or why he chose you specifically, or why now. He walked into the world at level 80, asked to die, and died. And the question of who he was has not been answered by anything in the game's text, its data files, or any statement from its developers. The most sustained theory connects him to Ebenarm, also called the Black Knight, a deity who appears in older Elder Scrolls lore primarily associated with Redguard religious tradition. Ebenarm is a god of war, specifically a god who values not victory, but the quality of combat, the honoring of martial discipline, the meaning of how a warrior fights and falls. He is depicted in armor. His traditional association with the color black, with ebony, is explicit in his name. He is a god for whom a death in honorable combat against a worthy opponent is not a failure, but an achievement, possibly the highest achievable thing in a warrior's existence. Under this theory, the Ebony Warrior is either a manifestation of this deity in mortal form, or an aspect of Ebenarm, who has taken flesh in order to seek a death proportional to his divine nature. Only a dragonborn, someone who has absorbed the essence of dozens of dragons, who is in some sense more than mortal themselves, would constitute a worthy opponent for a war god. The physical evidence in the game supports this reading obliquely. The Ebony Warrior's character model is scaled to 1.21 times. Normal human size, significantly taller and larger than a standard NPC. This is a small but meaningful detail. The only other figure in the game, scaled to a comparable magnitude, is Soon, the guardian of the bridge to Sovngarde's Hall of Valor, who is explicitly described as an ancient concept of honorable combat made manifest. Soon is not a person. He is a principle given physical form. If the scaling of the Ebony Warrior was a deliberate design choice rather than a random value, it places him in the same category as Sun, not a mortal, but a concept. Not a man who has lived and achieved and grown tired, but a divine idea that wears the form of such a man. The Ebony Warrior specifically requests Sovngarde as his destination after death, not the afterlife of Yoku, the Redguard homeland's religion, which has its own underworld and divine framework. Sovngarde, the Nordic warrior's paradise, the Hall of Valor, where the most honored fighters feast in the presence of Shor. A Redguard mortal, even an exceptional one, would have no clear reason to expect or desire Sovngarde over the rewards of his own religious tradition. But a being who has transcended mortal identity, who has mantled the concept of martial excellence so completely that he no longer belongs to any particular cultural religious framework, might choose the afterlife that most perfectly embodies what he values: eternal combat, eternal honor, the best warriors of all ages in one hall. He steps into your path. He states his need. He waits at the last vigil with the patience of something that has been waiting for a very long time and knows that patience is part of the point. And when it is over and he is gone, the mountains of the Velothi Range are very quiet, and the last vigil's snowpack is undisturbed, except for the marks of what happened there, and no record of the encounter exists anywhere in the histories of Skyrim. Number. Section 9. The Pale Lady of Frostmere Crypt. In the pale, the gray and cold middle northern region of Skyrim, flat tundra stretching between the mountains of Whiterun Hold and the coast of the Sea of Ghosts, there is a dungeon called Frostmere Crypt. It is unremarkable from the outside, a Nordic ruin, partially buried in the hillside, with the characteristic stone architecture and the particular smell of age and cold stone that every ruin in Skyrim carries. The quest that takes you there begins with a disturbance. A bandit encampment that was using the crypt as a base has gone silent. Something happened inside. Someone removed an artifact from a specific room where it had been resting for a very long time, and whatever that artifact was keeping contained is no longer contained. The artifact is called the Pale Blade. The thing it was containing is known as the Pale Lady. And understanding who she is, who she was, what she became, and why she was sealed in the first place requires a small piece of lore from a book called Lost Legends, which sits in Skyrim's various libraries, between dozens of other volumes that most players never read. Lost Legends describes an entity named Omriel. The book says, briefly, that the descendants of Ysgramor, the founding hero of Nordic civilization in Skyrim, the leader of the legendary 500, who sailed from Atmora and carved a place for humans in this land, fought this entity for decades, not years. Decades. The greatest warriors of their age, fighting a single being for a period that stretched across the careers of multiple generations. Eventually, they succeeded in confining her, using the pale blade as both a weapon and a seal placed on top of her sarcophagus. It served as the key that kept her dormant. This confinement was apparently considered so essential that the crypt was built around her specifically, that Wisegrammer's heirs chose this battle and this outcome as one of the defining achievements of their legendary careers. Who was Omriel? The book does not say in any detail. The designation Pale Lady comes from local folklore she is remembered. In the stories told around Morthal's hearths and in the small villages of the Pale, as a spirit that wanders the northern marshes at night and steals children, not arbitrarily, not as a predator taking prey. She steals children who are lost, who have wandered from home, who are alone in the dark. And the reason she does this, the stories say, is that she is looking for a daughter, a child she lost once, long ago, who she cannot find and cannot stop searching for. This is the heart of the Pale Lady, when you sit with it long enough. Omriel is not a monster in the conventional sense, a being of malevolence, of cruelty, of destructive intent toward mortals. She is a being of grief. The loss of her daughter is the wound around which everything else is organized. The stealing of children is not predation, but compulsion she takes them, because the absence of the one she is looking for has hollowed out her capacity to distinguish between one child and the child she needs. She fills the hollow with children she does not need, and none of them are what she is looking for, and she cannot stop. The Pale Lady manifests as a wisp mother, one of those peculiar spectral entities found in Skyrim's coldest and most isolated locations, trailing wisps of light and cold mist, drifting rather than walking, composed of something that is between physical form and pure atmospheric phenomenon. Wisp mothers are themselves unresolved as a category of being. A book in the game titled Wisp Mother, Two Theories presents exactly what its title promises. Two competing theories about what these entities are, written by scholars who cannot agree, and no definitive conclusion. The first theory is that they are the spirits of dead sorceresses, women who practiced cold weather magic extensively enough that at death their spirits became bound to the cold itself, to the mist and snow they had spent their lives working with. The second is that they are elemental manifestations, more like weather given consciousness than like people who died and became something else. The book leaves the debate open because its author does not know which is correct. Whether the Pale Lady is a human woman's spirit, bound into elemental form by the intensity of her grief and her magical nature, or whether she is something that was never quite human to begin with, that question does not resolve in the dungeon. What resolves in the dungeon is the immediate crisis. The bandit who removed the pale blade is dead, the Pale Lady is awake, and you are in her path. You can fight her, and you can win. And when you do, she disperses into the cold air of the crypt's interior. Whether this is death or simply dispersal, whether she reforms, slowly, over centuries, whether she is out there again in the northern marshes of the Pale in some diminished form, searching the game does not say. What it does say, very quietly, and in the details of the environment and the lore around it, is that something fought Wisegrammer's greatest descendants for decades before being contained, and the thing that gave it that kind of endurance and that kind of resistance was not power in the conventional sense. It was loss. It was the specific durability of grief that has become something beyond ordinary mourning. Grief that has organized itself into a shape that moves through the world looking for what it cannot find, that cannot be reasoned with or bargained with, because it is not functioning from the rational part of whatever mind it possesses. It is just looking. It will always be looking. And the only thing that could stop it for a while was a blade and a stone room and time. Number, Section 10. The Buried Word Wall in Sovngarde. When you complete Skyrim's main quest line, when you have learned the ancient shout that banished Alduin to the currents of time, gathered the heroes who can help you use it, and step through the portal that carries you from mortal Skyrim to the divine realm, where Nordic warriors rest after honorable death, you arrive in Sovngarde. And Sovngarde is extraordinary. Golden light from a sky that contains no identifiable sun. Grass so green it seems almost aggressive after hours of gray tundra. Enormous stone architecture, decorated with the iconography of Nordic warrior culture, taken to its mythic extreme. The Hall of Valor in the distance, warm light spilling from its windows, the sounds of celebration carrying faintly across the valley. You walk through mist that Alduin is using to hide the light and devour souls. You use the clear sky's shout to disperse it. You speak to the guardian of the Hall of Valor, a being named Tsun, who is himself a divine concept made flesh. And somewhere along this path, if you look, there is a word wall. Or rather, there is what was a word wall, a structure with the correct proportions, the correct relationship to the surrounding landscape, the characteristic carved stone surface but buried, covered in rock and rubble, facing inward rather than outward. Silent, inactive. You cannot interact with it. You cannot learn from it. You can only notice it and wonder what it is doing there. Word walls were built by ancient Nords in the mortal world, in physical Skyrim, in specific locations that had historical significance, battle sites, sacred places, the burial grounds of significant figures. They encode words of power in the language of dragons, and their power is accessible to the Dragonborn because of a special relationship between Dragonborn nature and the language those walls speak. They are monuments of the mortal world, products of human effort, built during the centuries when humanity was learning that they could resist the dominance of dragons. Sovngarde is not the mortal world. It is a realm of Aetherius, the divine dimension, the place where magic itself originates, where the gods who escaped from Mundus took up residence. It is not a place built by humans. It is a place that exists by divine decree, organized by Shor, populated by the spirits of the honorably dead. The presence of a word wall in Sovngarde is an anomaly. It should not be there. Even if we accept that the ancient Nords knew about Sovngarde in enough detail to build something within its geography, which would require either divine cooperation or a level of contact with the afterlife that is nowhere else, documented the wall being covered and inaccessible adds another layer of strangeness. Someone wanted this wall buried. The theory that Alduin is responsible for the burial is the most immediately satisfying. Alduin had been operating in Sovngarde for years by the time you arrive there, feeding on the souls of the dead, using the mist as cover, systematically devouring the population of the Nord afterlife. He has the motivation to remove any potential weapon from the arsenal of anyone who might come to Sovngarde to oppose him. If the buried word wall contains a shout connected to his defeat, or even just a shout that would strengthen a potential opponent, burying it would be in his direct interest. The timing works. Alduin arrived in Sovngarde at some point after his return to the mortal world, had time to find the word wall and cover it, and was still operating there when you arrive. The theory that the wall contains something that Shor does not want known is darker and stranger. Shor rules Sovngarde. He is present in some form. Throughout the realm, the warmth and light of the Hall of Valor are his. The fundamental character of the place reflects his nature. He is Lorcan, the divine whose dismembered heart powered the Dwemer's greatest ambition and catastrophic failure. His actual relationship to the mortal world, his actual nature as a being, his actual role in the structure of the Elder Scrolls universe. These are among the most contested questions in the series' theology. If the buried word wall contains a shout that reveals something about Shor's true nature, something that would change the relationship between the Nordic faithful and the god they have been worshipping, or that would constitute information, Shor prefers to keep from the mortals who eventually reach his realm. Then the rubble over the wall is not damage from Alduin, but an act of divine censorship, a god keeping a secret from his own afterlife's inhabitants. The most prosaic theory is that the wall was planned for the final area of the game and was not completed before release, that the rubble is a placeholder, and the wall behind it is either blank or contains content that was never finished. This is probably the most accurate explanation. But even if it is true, the fact that the wall exists in that form, in that location, invites the question of what should be there. Sovngarde deserves a word wall that means something proportional to its significance as a setting. Something carved in a divine realm by hands that understood what that realm was. Something that has been hidden for reasons that matter. The wall is buried. It cannot be read. And in the afterlife of Skyrim's greatest warriors, under a sky that burns with permanent golden light, something important waits under stone for a future that the game has not yet written. Number, Section 11. Rada of Ivarstead, an unsolved murder. Ivarstead is the kind of place that travelers pass through on their way to somewhere else. It sits at the foot of the 7,000 steps that lead to High Hrothgar, and every Nord who climbs those steps has to pass through Ivarstead first, but most of them do not stay. There is a mill that operates where the river runs fast and cold. There is an inn called Vilmer Inn, where the food is predictable and the fireplace is warm. There are a handful of houses occupied by farmers and woodcutters, and a few people who seem to have ended up in Ivarstead through a combination of circumstance and the fact that going somewhere else would require more energy, staying. It is a quiet place, slightly melancholy, the kind of place that accumulates people who have been worn smooth by time. In Ivarstead, on the edge of the village near the river, there is a man named Narfi. He lives in the ruins of a house, and it is worth being specific here about what ruins means in this context, because it matters. This is not a house that has gradually deteriorated through neglect. This is a house that has been structurally damaged. Walls are missing, the roof is compromised, the floor is exposed to weather. Narfi lives in what amounts to the skeleton of a building, and he lives there not because he has no alternatives, but because he will not leave. Because the last place he saw his sister is this house, and leaving the last place feels like abandoning the possibility of her return. His sister's name is Rada. She was an herbalist who gathered ingredients from along the river and from the small islands in the river, accessible by shallow crossings. She knew the land around Ivarstead well. She was not the kind of person who would be expected to get lost or come to harm in familiar territory. And one day, more than a year before the Dragonborn arrives in Ivarstead, she went out and did not come back. Narfi is not well. He is fragmented in the way that grief can make people fragmented when the grief is too large and too sustained to be integrated into a functioning life. He oscillates between moments of surprising clarity. He knows what happened, somewhere in the part of himself that can know things, and long stretches of confusion and repetition. He asks about Rada. He waits. He stays in the ruins because there is nothing else for him to do that makes sense within the framework of his loss. You can investigate. The quest that follows is brief and ends without resolution. You speak to other residents of Ivarstead about Rada. They are vague, slightly uncomfortable, offering what they know with the hedging quality of people who are not entirely sure whether they should be talking. She gathered herbs. She went to the river islands. She was last seen going toward the river. You wade into the cold water of the river near the islands, and you find a skeleton. With the skeleton, partially preserved by the cold, you find a distinctive necklace that Narfi confirms belonged to his sister. Rada is dead. Her body is in the river. She was in the area she was known to frequent, doing something she did regularly. And that is where the investigation ends, because there is nothing else to find. No cause of death, no signs of violence on the skeleton, no evidence of another person's involvement, no journal or note that would suggest what happened in her final moments. Just bones in cold water and a necklace that belongs to a woman who is not coming home. Who or what killed Rada? The absence of visible violence on the skeleton is not definitive evidence of accident. Certain kinds of wounds do not leave marks on bone. Blunt trauma to soft tissue, strangulation, drowning without prior injury, these would all produce a skeleton that looked, on examination, like a person who simply died. And the manner of the death, a body in the river, someone who regularly visited the river, is consistent with either accident or murder made to look like accident. The motive theory most often discussed focuses on the house. If Rada and Narfi were the last living members of their family in Ivarstead, and if Rada's death would render Narfi, who is clearly not capable of managing property in his current state, effectively dispossessed of any claim to the family home, then someone with a desire for that property had an obvious interest in Rada's death. This is a prosaic motive, tediously ordinary even. But most murders in small communities are prosaic and ordinary. The dramatic murder with an elaborate cause is the exception. The murder motivated by property or debt or a long-standing personal resentment is the rule. The specific quality of discomfort that Ivarstead's other residents display when talking about Rada is suggestive but not conclusive. People are uncomfortable talking about local deaths for many reasons, most of them innocent. The fact that nobody is aggressively protective of a particular narrative about what happened to her, no insistent pushing of the accident explanation, No community closing of ranks around a particular account is actually less suspicious than its absence would be if someone with something to hide were in the group. And then there is the simpler reading. Rada slipped. She stepped wrong on the bank of a cold river on a day when the rocks were wet and the current was fast. She fell. She did not come back up. This happens. It happens to people who know the land well, on days when the conditions are slightly different from expectation. It happens without anyone doing anything, without any crime, without any motive. It just happens, and someone is left in the ruins of a house asking where their sister went. Narfi's grief, when you bring him the necklace, is very quiet. He says he knew. He thanks you. He says he will stay here. He has nowhere else to go, and nothing that could make going somewhere else feel like the right choice. You leave him there, in the ruins, and the river keeps running cold and fast over the stones. And nobody knows what happened to Rada. Maybe nobody who was present for it is still alive to say. Number Section 12, The Sleeping Tree and What Fell from the Sky. Near Whiterun, in the tundra south and west of the city walls, there is a place marked on the map as Sleeping Tree Camp. It is a small bandit encampment, a fire ring, some bedrolls, a chest with leveled loot, the kind of thing you clear and forget about in the routine course of traveling Skyrim's roads. Except for one detail that makes it unlike any other bandit camp in the game. At its center, enormous and pale and leafless, stands a tree that should not exist. Should not exist in the sense of being rare or unusual. Should not exist in the sense that it belongs to no species found anywhere else in Tamriel, bears no resemblance to any flora documented in any of Skyrim's 337 books, produces a substance with no alchemical equivalent in any local ingredient catalog, and occupies a patch of earth with soil composition visibly different from the surrounding tundra, even to a casual observer. It is not native. It did not grow from a seed carried by a bird, or scattered by wind, or planted by a gardener. Something brought it here, or brought the seed that became it, from somewhere else. And a note found in the camp, written by the camp's previous occupants, who were clearly not botanists but who could see what was in front of them, says, in the plain language of people, without a theoretical framework to contain what they observed, that the tree was not always here, that something came down from the sky, that the tree is what it became. The sap this tree produces is a thick, pale blue, mildly luminescent substance that, when refined, constitutes a variant of skooma, the most powerful and addictive illegal narcotic in Tamriel. Skooma is derived from moon sugar, a substance associated with the Khajiit culture of elsewhere and with their specific religious and physiological relationship to Skyrim's two moons. It is powerful enough that its trade is controlled and suppressed by every legitimate authority in Tamriel, and lucrative enough that those suppressions largely fail. The sap of the sleeping tree bypasses the moon sugar step entirely, producing something equivalent in effect through an entirely different chemical pathway. This should be impossible by any framework for understanding how skooma works that the Elder Scrolls universe provides. The Khajiit merchant caravan that parks near Sleeping Tree Camp consistently, reliably, as a permanent feature of the location, is not there by coincidence. The Khajiit caravans of Skyrim are widely discussed, in both casual NPC dialogue and in the game's wider lore, as serving purposes beyond simple commerce. They gather information, they observe. They report back to interests in elsewhere, whose agenda in Skyrim is not entirely transparent. A Khajiit merchant who has permanently stationed their caravan adjacent to an alien organism, producing refined narcotic sap, is not there by chance. They know what the tree is, or they know enough about what it produces to have made a business arrangement around it, and they are not going to discuss either of these things with a wandering dragonborn who happened to clear out the bandit camp next door. The organic material around the base of the sleeping tree in the soil, at the roots, in the composition of the ground, immediately beneath it, does not match anything in the surrounding environment. This is visible in how the game renders the area. The patch of ground around the tree has a different texture and color from the tundra grass a few feet away. This is the kind of detail that either means nothing or means that whoever built the environment was deliberately marking the ground around the tree as other, as not of this place, as contaminated or altered by the presence of something foreign. The tree changes its environment. It brings something of wherever it came from with it. What kind of somewhere else could a tree come from? The Elder Scrolls universe has documented cases of Daedric artifacts that crossed into Mundus from Oblivion. It has documented impacts from Aetherius, the divine realm above fragments of divine material that fell through the holes in the sky that the stars represent and lodged in mortal earth. It has, in certain apocryphal texts, references to Akavir, the other continent, across the Eastern Sea, a place that sent invaders to Tamriel more than once and from which very little is actually understood. Any of these frameworks could accommodate the sleeping tree. It could be a Daedric organism, seeded into the mortal world for purposes consistent with some prince's agenda. It could be a piece of divine matter that took root and grew. It could be from somewhere else, entirely from beyond the framework the game provides, from a category of somewhere else that Tamriel's scholars have not yet named. The bandit operation around it suggests that some people know the tree's value without knowing its nature. They guard the sap collection without asking where the sap comes from. They trade the refined product without wondering what produces it. The economics are clear. The metaphysics are not their concern. And the Khajiit merchant nearby smiles and does business and answers questions about their wares and does not discuss the enormous pale tree behind them. The sleeping tree grows. The tundra around it is quietly different from the tundra beyond its influence. The sky above the camp is the same sky as everywhere else in Skyrim, ordinary and overcast and gray. And somewhere in the gap between what fell from it and what grows in this spot, there is a story that nobody in Skyrim has been able to tell. Number, Section 13. Closing. The mysteries that remain. By now, the fire has burned low. The questions have accumulated in the comfortable dark, patient, and unhurried, exactly as questions should be when there is nowhere you need to be and nothing that requires your action. The Dwemer are still gone. Their machinery still runs. In the underground city of Blackreach, that impossible cavern beneath Skyrim's northern mountains, with its artificial sun and its glowing mushrooms and its network of roads and aqueducts built for a people who have not walked them in thousands of years. The centurions still pace, the steam still moves through the pipes, the water still runs in the channels, and the question of where the Dwemer went, whether they were elevated or consumed or scattered or simply understood something so complete and so final that they cease to be part of the consensus of existence. That question is as open as it was when the ash piles in Bam's Amshend were first, described in a lore book that most players never read. Rorikstead's fields are still green. Dwayne Manette still lives in his house with his book about Daedric bargains and his reluctance to discuss the soil. Lemkil's daughters are still growing up in a village that has a pattern with mothers that nobody will explain. And Lokir died at Helgen running from something. And the something he was running from is still there, quiet and prosperous, and full of soul gems on shelves where soul gems should not be. Sadia and Kamatu have both told their stories, and the truth of what happened in Hammerfell during the war has not been provided by either of them in its complete form. Somewhere in the space between traitor and hero, between mercenary and lawman, between two people telling the truth as they know it and the truth as it actually is, somewhere in that space, the answer lives. Inaccessible, complete, known perhaps only to a history that the game does not have room to contain in full. A letter is on its way to you right now, carried by a courier who does not know who paid them, directed to wherever you have been, most recently using your voice. A friend, it will say. And the question of who is watching you, who has always been watching you, who wants you to grow in power, but will not tell you why that question will still be open when the letter arrives. In the Velothi Mountains, bones too large to belong to any living creature are embedded in stone beneath a ruin that translates to Music City, and the occasional trembling in the mountain's floor has no geological explanation, only a sonic one, and only if you know what to listen for and what it means. 3 people tied to chairs in a shack near Morthal eventually found their way home, and they never knew what distinguished them from any other traveler on Skyrim's roads, or why an assassin brought them to that particular building on that particular night. And Astrid is gone now, and the secret she held about whose name was on the contract she described, that secret died with her, probably, except that the theological framework she was using was never secret. It is right there in the lore, for anyone who looks. The Ebony Warrior fought his final battle in a frozen ravine in the Velothi Mountains, and died the death he asked for, and was never named. He is in Sovngarde now, presumably, if his stated hope about his destination was accurate. He is in the Hall of Valor, feasting with the heroes of every Nordic age, and he is the only one there who is not Nordic, and the story of how he got there, and what he is, and what his presence in that divine space means, has not been told by anyone. The Pale Lady is dispersed. Omriel, who fought Ysgrimor's descendants for decades, who was sealed in a crypt in the Pale, who woke up when a bandit took the wrong sword from the wrong resting place, she is gone, or resting, or slowly reforming in the cold northern air. The daughter she was looking for when the first era was still new is still lost. The grief that organized her existence into that devastating, child-stealing compulsion has not been resolved by the dispersal of the form it inhabited. Whether grief of that age and that depth simply ends when the entity that holds it is defeated is a question without a clear answer in either theology or psychology. In Sovngarde, under a pile of ancient rubble, a word wall waits. Whatever is carved on it, whatever word it contains, whatever shout it was meant to grant to whatever dragonborn was supposed to find, it is inaccessible in the afterlife of Skyrim's greatest warriors. In the realm of a god who rules with the specific warmth of someone who has lost something and built something else in the space the loss created. The wall is there, and it is covered, and the question of what is written on it will outlast the game itself. Narfi stands in the ruins of his house by the river at Ivarstead, and the water runs cold over the stones where Rhaeda's bones were found, and nobody knows whether she slipped or was pushed or encountered something in the dark that she was not expecting, and the necklace you return to Narfi is all that is left of the life she was living before it ended. The sleeping tree grows in the tundra south of Whiterun. Its roots are in soil that belongs to somewhere else. Its sap feeds a small economy of careful people who do not ask the questions they know they should ask. And the sky above it, when you stand beneath its pale branches and look up, is the same sky that covers every other square foot of Skyrim, ordinary and vast and containing. In the Norse of its cosmology, countless holes torn by gods who escape their own creation, bleeding divine light down onto a world that is still figuring out what to do with the inheritance they left behind. These mysteries will not be resolved tonight. They have not been resolved in over a decade of sustained community investigation, careful lore reading, data mining, and genuine collaborative intellectual effort from one of the most devoted fan communities any game has ever generated. They may never be resolved, some of them certainly cannot be, because the answers were never committed to the game's code. Some of them are questions the designers asked themselves and could not agree on an answer for. Some of them are questions the designers did not know they were asking. And some of them are questions that were asked deliberately, with full knowledge that they would never be answered, because the specific experience of a question that does not resolve the specific texture of wondering, sustained and comfortable, and finally, quiet, was understood to be worth creating for its own sake. A world that answers all its own questions is a world that feels smaller when you finish exploring it. A world that keeps its questions open, that lets you feel the shape of the unknown pressing against the known from just beyond the edge of light. That world feels larger the longer you spend in it. Skyrim is larger now, after 10 years, than it was on release day. More documented in some respects. But the documentation has not shrunk the mystery. It has only made it clearer how much mystery there is. The mountains of the Velothi Range are dark and cold and very old. The ruins that dot them were built by people whose names we mostly do not know, for purposes we can only partially reconstruct, in service of ambitions that ended in ways none of them anticipated. The Dwemer who built Kagranzel expected to use it for a long time. The dragon cult priests who maintained the word walls expected those words to matter to a future that has since replaced them with something they could not have predicted. The ancient Nords who sealed Omriel in her crypt expected the seal to hold, and they were right about that for a very long time, and eventually they were wrong. Everything in Skyrim's ruins is a monument to the distance between expectation and outcome, between what people intended and what actually happened, between the world they thought they were building toward and the world that actually came. That distance is where the mystery lives. That distance is where we have been spending this long night. The fire is coals now. The wind has settled. The cold is still out there, the specific cold of high-altitude Skyrim, with its thin air and its ancient stone, and its machinery that keeps running without anyone to run it. But in here, it is warm. In here, the questions have been asked and left properly open, and there is nothing left to do with them tonight, except let them drift, and follow the drift down into something slower. The graybeards on the summit of High Hrothgar are still awake. They are always awake up there, meditating in the cold, holding the weight of a voice that could unmake the mountain if spoken without absolute restraint. They are the ones who understand that the most powerful thing is often the thing left unsaid, the question left unresolved, the shout held in the throat, present but not deployed. There is wisdom in that, wisdom in holding the question without demanding the answer, wisdom in being comfortable in the dark. Sleep well. The mysteries will be here when you wake up. They have been here for 1,000 years already, and they are patient. If you made it through all of this, if you followed every thread, sat with every open ending, let the darkness of all these unsolved questions settle over you like snow on old stone, then you are exactly the right kind of person for this. The kind who wants to know not just what is in the dungeon, but what the dungeon means. The kind who reads the books on the shelves, even when there is no quest asking you to. The kind who stands in a Dwemer ruin for an extra moment and lets the absence of its builders land. If that is you, subscribing means you will always have another thread to follow when the night gets long. There is always more of Skyrim to sit with, always more of its deep, patient, quietly astonishing world to unfold. And if you are watching this from somewhere with a particular kind of night, late summer or deep winter, in a city or somewhere very quiet, leave it in the comments. It matters to know that people are out there, all over the world, settling into the same questions at the same time. The torch is out, the storm has passed, the mountains are still. Sleep well, cozy night.